Welcome, everybody, to the Art of Implementing Well. This is the Science of Reading edition, and I'm excited to have Jose here today. He is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Ed and focused a lot on multilingual learners while there. He's going to introduce himself, briefly talk about his experience, and then we're going to dive right into what are some of the things that we're learning about implementing Science of Reading for multilingual learners. So welcome, Jose. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Anthony. I look forward to the conversation. I'll take you all the way back. I'll do it quick, but my journey started when my family came over here from Cuba. So I started school not knowing a word of English. And if it wasn't for the educators I had at that time, and they're miracles because there wasn't much resources or research available to reach kids like me back in the 70s. But if it wasn't for them and their focus and their dedication to making sure that I was going to be successful, I don't know how I would have been able to acquire English, but at the same time also learn to read. And it was the experiences with these educators that got me inspired to become a teacher of English learners as well. And I taught emergent bilinguals for several years in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, then eventually wanted to become a school administrator. So we moved to North Carolina, where I pursued my graduate studies and also was a school administrator for Durham Public Schools. I was in a school that was very multicultural and very diverse. We had lots of students from different backgrounds. I had one specific group of students that were migratory. So they were from migrant farm working families. And when I reached out to the State Department of Education and asked them about their migrant education program, they asked me to actually run the state program and be a part of it. And I was proud to work with the migrant students for the state of North Carolina for several years, which led me to a director's meeting at the U.S. Department of Ed. And while I was there, I was asked to join the U.S. Department of Education and become their Deputy Secretary for the Office of English Language Acquisition, also known as OELA. And through OELA, we influenced policy, grants, funding, resources, research, everything having to do with our nation's emergent bilingual students, which are now a large part of our school system.
Great, thank you so much. And I think the thing that we're really interested in, everybody's talking about Science of Reading, and there's people that have been trying to implement this for a while, people that are just starting to implement it. And not only is it kind of structurally different than what they've been used to, now you add the additional layer of emergent bilingual students and multilingual learners. And what are some of the things that you're noticing as people try to implement these things that are really standing out and something worth considering?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it seems like the science of reading terminology has become almost a lightning rod out there, and people are forgetting that it's just a series of research studies that are out there on those foundational skills in order to be able to learn how to read. So what happens with us when we put on that multilingual learner lens, right? And we talk about the science of reading-based instruction and what it would look like for our emergent bilinguals. We just have to make sure that we consider that the emergent bilingual students are learning to read, but they're learning to do it in a new language, right? So a concern that we see, especially with our educators, is that with science of reading-based instruction, we might focus a little too much on phonics and sounding out words at the expense of learning the meaning of these words. And that's where that oral language development piece comes, where the students are learning not just to decode these words, but the meaning of these words, right? Because I mean, you can read a word, decode a word, but if you don't understand its meaning, then it's pointless. You wouldn't be reading and experiencing a full literacy experience, right? So today, what we are trying to do is review the research that's out there, look at the practices that are out there, and try to find a way of unifying language and literacy for English learners. Because we all agree, in order for them to reach equity in academic success, they do need to be able to read in the English language. But how does the oral language piece and the reading domains fit together in order to lead to effective literacy instruction? That's the concern. That's the argument, the debate, the conversation that's happening out there.
But I remember when, I was learning another language, right? I always had to learn how to pronounce it correctly, because in some languages, like just a slight intonation difference can mean something completely different. So pronouncing and just the ability to say the words properly with the right intonation and the right meaning was critical for communications. And then the other part, like you were saying, is understanding the intended meaning of that word in the cultural context, because you could translate something in your head in English into a different language, and when you say it in that cultural context, it could mean something completely different, right? Or it could be offensive, or it could be whatever. And so I think the challenge right now that I'm seeing is that when we're debating the science of reading, we're not focused on some of these nuances that exist in just being a good English speaker and communicator in the language.
Right, and that's correct, and that's why we're seeing some misinterpretations, or you can even say myths that are out there when it comes to this science of reading based instruction and how it applies to emergent bilinguals. A lot of people see it as a deficit model. A lot of people see it as a one-size-fits-all approach. And what we're trying to do is have conversations where we can find these areas of agreement, these areas where we can overlap and look at things like Scarborough's rope and look at it through that multilingual learner lens. And it starts with the fact that we need to realize that the science of reading research needs to expand. There's some studies out there that show how these foundational skills, like you said, right? Looking at these symbols that are letters that, when are put together, turn into words, and when those words are put together, they're sentences, right, that you can read. Research that's out there that tells us what that looks like, right? What does that look like in my classroom for my multilingual learners, where we can recognize and address their literacy needs, while also understanding and celebrating bilingualism and how they need not just that systematic and explicit instruction that you're talking about, but also how we incorporate their oral language development and their backgrounds and experiences into this science of reading instruction.
If a district is thinking about implementing this and they have a large emergent bilingual population, what's the one thing you wish they knew ahead of time as they think about this implementing science of reading, especially in states that are mandated and they're just rushing to do it, right? What's one thing you would kind of recommend that they consider as they implement this for emergent bilinguals?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Anthony. And I think I talk about where's that overlap? Where are we all speaking the same language when it comes to implementing this type of instruction for emergent bilingual students? And that the one area where we find that overlap, and the areas where we're seeing eye to eye and where we have something to work with, the bridge, I call it, comes with speaking and listening. That's such an important part of not just acquiring the language, but also attaching meaning to these words that we're decoding. So oral language is said to be the foundation for reading and writing, right? I always say, if you can't speak it or hear it or understand it, you won't be able to read it or write it, right? So students need to use that spoken language in order to understand the written language. So think of that as the foundation. The speaking and listening component influences the word recognition, and that's what's critical to reading. So what I tell district leaders, what I tell school administrators, what I tell teachers is our students need opportunities to practice their speaking and listening skills, and give them opportunities to do it in a safe environment, right? In an environment where they're willing to take risks and take a chance at what they're reading and try to attach meaning to what they're reading. So that can be in peer groups, homogeneous groups, groups where there's native English speakers mixed with English learners, where they feel that they would have these opportunities to take a chance to speak and listen and try to be involved in discourse that is attached to a text that they're reading or something that they're decoding together. So that's what I always say, Anthony. That's the foundation. That's the one thing we all agree on, and the one thing that we need to be taking a look at first as we're implementing this instruction, whether it's mandated or whether we're doing it because we know it's a best practice.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. English wasn't my first language as well. And so I had to do the small groups, but it was nice to do homogeneous and heterogeneous grouping and switch it up, because sometimes I needed to get pushed by somebody that was a bit more advanced, but other times I just needed that safe space where I could mess up the pronunciation of words or mess up the comprehension of a paragraph, and I felt okay, right? And I didn't feel embarrassed. So you kind of need both, right? And that's that kind of zone of proximal development that you're constantly playing around in as a teacher. So one of the things for our audience that I try to reinforce is there are conditions that I believe create the best environment for implementing well, and that's having preparing for the right mindset, right? Preparing people to be in the right mindset to implement. And there's some people that are always eager and some people that are always resistant, and you're dealing with all of the mindsets within a large organization, and so trying to prepare for that. The second piece is collaboration, right? How do we share our ideas and learn from each other so that we're not always starting from scratch? And then the third is kind of having the resilient system so that within changing environments and conditions, you could still execute on the goal. And so perhaps, we could switch this conversation a little bit to talk about those things. So the first is just mindset. Like, from your experience, what would you say is the right kind of mindset as districts are thinking about just the change of implementing something like this? What have you seen working when, what's the right quality of mindset that's needed in order for this to work well?
So one of the things that I always like to talk about, and Anthony, you'd understand this, because a lot of people come up to me at times and wonder about what it's like to be bilingual. Are we two monolingual people? Do we have like a switch that we use? And there's lots of people out there that talk about translanguaging and using the full repertoire of our languages in order to have conversations, in order to decode text, and bringing that background to the forefront. And that has led to conversations about the bilingual brain. Is it different from a monolingual brain? And that's where a lot of the pushback is. Well, the monolingual brain and is a little different. So science of reading seems to be focused a little more on those kids. Can we use any of that for our students with the bilingual brains? Anyway, I say all of that because I think the mindset should be, and it's what the research points to, it's what a lot of neuroscientists and linguists have been pointing to, is that there's nothing about this bilingual brain that we talk about that suggests that our approach or our pathway to literacy should be different from a monolingual brain, right? There's just some fundamental things that we all need to do. Like you said, you needed to figure out what all these symbols sounded like in order to piece them together and make words, right? Learning to read is based on things that are universal, for a lack of a better word, right? Phonological development, we all need it. It doesn't matter, your race, your ethnicity, your background, whether you're monolingual, bilingual, whether you're a student that has, special needs. The foundational piece, the mindset that we need to have is that this part of it is universal to all students. And that's kind of like a little barrier we need to break through and have that, it's almost like an asset-based mindset, right? We're all going through this. This isn't a thing that's unique to certain groups. We all need to go through this fundamental, phonological development, right? To be able to bind those letters and sounds to meaning, and the foundation to ultimately learning to read.
Yeah. So, I think the second point I had was just around opportunities to collaborate. And I met you through a convening Lexia hosted. And it was great because it wasn't really about the product. It was just understanding and deeply learning about the conditions and why science of reading needs to be implemented. I think a lot of times when we convene, we kind of make them into professional development workshops or something like that. And that starts to leap in. That seems to go a little bit further than where we need to be in some certain situations where we firmly just need to understand and collaborate with others and kind of have that discourse with each other around this. And so can you talk a little bit about, the importance of that in your work? And, you talked a little bit about some of the convenings you've had recently.
Sure. What's funny, Anthony, is people sometimes refer to me like as an expert, right? And I always say I am far from an expert. I'm more of a curator. What I like to do is pull people together. Lexia gives us the opportunity to host a lot of these conversations where I have neuroscientists, I'll have practitioners, I'll have researchers, I have those that are focused more on our multilingual learners, and those that are focused a lot more on just literacy in general. Just like you said, convene them, bring them together, and have these conversations. Go at it, right? Because there's just so much out there, and it's almost like we're passing ships at times. We'll go to a panel, we'll have a conversation, we'll shake hands, everybody goes their own way, and we're back to our corners. And we're having it's become a challenge to find common ground, common framework, and there's a lot of resources out there where you can draw and you can connect the dots and see the overlap and see these areas where we're saying the same thing and we're thinking the same things. We're just there's just a little degree of difference, but if you do an angle, even if it's a little degree, it keeps getting wider and wider the further we go. So we just gotta find these areas of overlap, find the areas where we have common ground, common framework. There's the Great Council of City Schools just came out with frameworks for literacy skills for multilingual learners. Pivot Learning brought some group together on something coming. I think it's called narrowing down or finding the common ground on literacy skills for multilingual learners. And they're saying a lot of the same things, but everyone feels like it's two documents. It's either or. And we got to turn these conversations. One thing I always say, Anthony, is we listen to each other, but we'll always say yes, but instead of yes, and. So I'm looking for that. I'm looking for these opportunities to come together to say yes, and we can have better conversations and find the common ground that we're looking for.
Well, I'm just gonna give you a plug. I think that you've done an excellent job curating the people that attend these, because I felt like I've been able to reach out to many of them post the event, and they're just so willing to share their ideas. And even if we don't agree on everything, they're we have an open mind to each other, and we're willing to discuss and understand and seek to understand the other ways that they're thinking about this.
You brought up something in one of them that it's something I think about. I remember you shocked people when you said it, because obviously you're exposed to so many systems that are out there, and you mentioned even something that a program that might not have evidence or research, if it's implemented with fidelity and done with the right mindset and the right attitude, even a poorly created program can be positive and have a good effect and show acceleration and growth and those kinds of things. And remember, we were all shocked, but as a curator, I've unpacked these things, and you're absolutely correct. There's so many things. If we just have the right mindset, we can make things happen. And here's something with research that's behind it, and people that are supporting it. So we just gotta figure it out.
Yeah, I remember that did shock some of the academics in the room. All right, and the last piece I just wanted to touch upon is this idea of resilient systems. And as we were preparing for this, I briefly mentioned how some districts are really working hard to develop supplemental materials that are culturally relevant for their audiences as they try to implement some of these science of reading programs that aren't totally developed with that mindset. Unfortunately, I think also one of the challenges is some districts might have 100 different backgrounds to address, and so it's really hard to do that. And so, as you would recommend, how would you recommend districts thinking about the systems that will allow them to sustain these kinds of implementations?
Okay, yeah, appreciate that. And what's great about this question, Anthony, and it's kind of we always stop the conversations before getting to what you're asking for right now, which is kind of the answer to the question, what does this look like in my classroom? Because we talk theory, we talk research, we talk about the bilingual brain, and the teachers are like, time out, that's great. What does it look like in my classroom? What's the practical solution or application of these concepts? And you just mentioned one, yes, of course, that background knowledge and information and making sure that our students see themselves reflected in the texts that they're reading and the content that they're learning is crucial. But you might have a class with, several different backgrounds and ethnic groups and very diverse class. There's well over 400 different languages spoken in our country. So what do we do? Where do we aim, right? Where do we aim our curriculum? And one thing I've noticed, and again, this is kind of that either or. It's not either or. It's opportunities to learn from each other. And I'm talking about students. You talked about that safe space. If I have a class of students from different backgrounds, and let's say I have a group that's from somewhere in Africa, Rwanda and the Congo or something like that, and I'm teaching a text, I can pick a text that speaks to them, right? There's the long journey to water, or the journey to water. I forgot what it's called. But there's a book out there that talks about a couple of Sudanese teenagers that are impacted because of their journey to get water for their village and whatever. My key is that my point is this. A book like that would speak to these students from Rwanda and the Sudan and the Congo. But what happens to my kids from Vietnam and Mexico? Well, they'll learn from these conversations. That's why it goes back to this discourse and these discussions and these conversations. Yeah, I probably can't relate to this story because I didn't have to do that in my culture, the country that I'm from. But you did, and I'm all in. I want to hear what it's like. And I'm sure there'll be some connections. And at some point, we'll read something that I'll connect with, and I'm going to tell you what it was like. So it's kind of like we're all in it together. So when we're talking about being, culturally responsive, yes, it's responding to the kids in your class. It's not this this multicultural, title where, you just pick different cultures to talk about. No, you want to respond to the different students in your classroom, but you'll get to them. You'll get to them. And in that journey, they're all going to be connecting to, whatever group you're focused on, whatever background you're tapping into during a conversation or a lesson or a text that you're unpacking. And it's called A Long Walk to Water. I just looked it up. By Sue Parker. It's an excellent book on a couple of Sudanese teenagers and kind of how their journey leads to each other, and it all has to do with getting fresh, clean water to their villages.
I think you bring up an excellent point. I think that one, it'd be great if our teachers had the tools that allow them to share that they're going to cover all of these things over the course of the year and make it relevant to different cultures within the classroom. Just having that visibility, I think, will make people feel more open to the idea of listening to other stories. And two, I think we, in general, need to continue to be open-minded and empathetic to the different cultures that we interact with all the time. And, that's a great example of how that could happen in the classroom. So, I wanted to thank you so much, Jose, for taking the time, educating this audience around the implementation of the science of reading, especially in the emergent bilingual environments and learners. And so thank you so much for sharing your experiences. If there's anything I could do in return, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Well, thank you, Anthony, for having me. I appreciate it. And yes, platforms like this where we can have these types of conversations, I think, are important because ultimately we want our students to experience success. I know when I was a teacher, this was back in the 90s, my kids were almost inferring how English and reading works. I was kind of leaving it up to chance, and through research and what we're seeing out there, we're realizing that doesn't have to be the case anymore. There are tangible practices and strategies that can be incorporated into your classrooms, even if a group of multilingual learners that you can use so that your students will both learn to learn the language, right? But at the same time, have these opportunities to learn to read. And that's what really transforms their future and their education, is this language and literacy combination that we're looking for. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.